Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Flutter and Firebase Masterclass. If you don't already know, Firebase is a backend service we can use to give our Flutter apps a bunch of really important tools and functionality. So in this course, I'm going to be teaching you 4 main areas that I think are essential when it comes to building apps. So we got Firestore just to store some basic type of information like text and numbers. Then we got storage to upload and store files such as images. And of course, authentication, so like email and passwords. I'll show you also how to do Auth, such as Google sign in. And the last one I really like is also hosting. So I'll show you how to host your app on the web so you can just share the link around easily without having to download the app. So I'm going to be teaching you these 4 topics and we'll put it all together. At the end, I'll show you how to code up some real apps using Firebase for the backend. So just real quick, the overview of what this course covers. I'll start by showing you how to set it up, so just to connect your Flutter app to your Firebase console. And then we'll start off with Firestore, and a good way to learn Firestore functionality is to just make a basic CRUD application, which is pretty much a notes app. And then we've got authentication with email as well as OAuth like Google sign in. And once we got all that kind of theory out of the way, let's make a social media app with all of that authentication and things like that. So we got profile and users, and also a chat application, and also a e-commerce type of application. So all of this using Firebase for the backend. And then we'll move on to the storage, and I'll show you how to upload images using your phone. And then we'll move on to hosting, where we can upload our web app to Firebase and then we can just share a link around. So there's a lot of good information packed into this course, so take your time digesting all of it and make sure you also code as well yourself to really learn this stuff. But without further ado, let's start from the very beginning. Welcome to the Flutter and Firebase Masterclass. In this one, I'm going to teach you the 4 most important operations when it comes to databases. And I'm going to show you by coding up a super simple notes app where you can create a new note, read the notes from a database, as well as updating and deleting. So let's go to your Firebase console and let's create a new project. I'm just going to call it CRUD tutorial. And I'm just going to create this now. Cool, so now what we need to do is we need to connect our Firebase with our Flutter project. So I've opened up here a brand new Flutter project, and let's open up the terminal. And if you've never used the Flutter Fire CLI before, then you're going to need to install this one. But I've already done that, so I'm just going to skip that step. And the first thing we need to do is to say Firebase login to make sure that you're logged into the same email as the Firebase console. Then let's say Flutter pub global activate the Flutterfire CLI. Looks like we have a little error thing. I'm just going to copy this and paste it in. Sweet. Then let's say Flutterfire configure, and let's look for our Firebase project that we just made. So there it is, CRUD tutorial, and I'm going to choose Android and iOS. Let's say Flutter pub add Firebase core. Awesome, and then we always need to add this little code in the main function just to set up. So widgets Flutter binding, ensure that it's initialized. And then let's change this to an asynchronous function and await Firebase initialize app. Cool. And I always just kill the app and restart it just to make sure everything's working fine. And there it is. And if you come back to your Firebase console and you refresh it, you should be able to see we connected the 2 apps, so the Android and the iOS. Awesome. Now the first thing we want to do here is go to the build. We want to have the Firestore database. And let's create a database, hit next, and you can choose your location, but I'm just going to leave it at US. Cool, and then if you come to the rules, you can see it's allowing the read and write. I'm just going to change the write to be true, and this just means we can now save data into it. Sweet. Now let's come back to our Flutter project again, and let's add in this package for the Firestore. So Flutter pub add cloud Firestore. And now we can access our database. So I'm going to delete everything below the main function and just create this from scratch. So I've got my app and then our material app, and I'm just going to call it a home page. And it's always good practice to put your pages in a separate folder. And this can be a blank scaffold. And let's come back to our main.dart and then let's import this. Cool, so we should just have a blank scaffold. Sweet, and let's just set up this app, just the basics of it. So the app bar. And I just want to have a floating action button. So that's the thing on the bottom right. Let's give it a plus icon. Cool, so now I'm going to create a new folder called services. And I'm going to have firestore.dart. And so I'm going to put all the operations into this file here. So class Firestore service. Now the very first thing we need to do is to get the collection of notes from the database. And then we're going to have the 4 things. So create, read, update, and delete. And specifically for us in this app, we're going to say like create means adding a new note. Read is getting the note from the database. And then we want to update notes. And same thing as deleting. Cool, so if I start with the first one here, let's get the collection reference of notes. And let's call the collection just notes. If I just quickly code just the first function here for the creating, we want to have a future. And this is for adding a note. So I'm going to accept a parameter, just a string for what the note is. And the bit of code you need to know, if we go to the notes, you can see after the dot, the add method. And in these curly braces, you can also have multiple fields. So let's say in the note field, I want to give it the note, but let's also have a timestamp. Cool, and so let's try to test this out with our floating action button. So if I click on this button here, I want to open up a small box to get the user to type something in. So if I create a method here real quick, let's open note box and let's show the dialog. And we're going to need the context. So I'm actually going to change this to a stateful widget. So if you hover over this stateless widget and you press on Mac, it's command dot, and you can see you got this option here. I think on Windows it might be control dot. We can now build this dialog. And let's just start off with a blank text field. So just to test this out, if I save this, I click on the plus and sweet, here's our little dialog box, and then you got the text field inside where we can type in. So how do we access what the user typed? Well, we need a text controller. So you can see in the text field, we can give it the text controller. And then now we need a button. So in the actions, let's have a button to save. So I'm just going to use an elevated button. And let's say add. Cool, so we want to type a note in and then we want to hit add to save it. So currently it's executing nothing. So inside these braces, let's add a new note. And we want to access the methods from this Firestore class, right? So at the top here, let's get the Firestore service object at the top. And then now we can say Firestore service, and then we can access all of those methods. So dot add note, and we want to give it the note. So that's going to be the text controller. Cool, and then just a couple UI things we need to do. So after you add the note, we want to clear what's in the text controller and just leave it blank after it's added in. And then we also want to close the box. So let's try this. First note, and I add it, and nothing's happening on our app because we are not reading it yet. But if I come back to my console and I refresh it, you can see there's our notes, and we've got our first document and there's our first note there. So that's the natural next step we need to do, right? We need to be able to read now that we can create. So let's fill out the read method here. Now read, we're going to use a stream and a stream builder. to sort of continuously listen to any changes in our database. So let's call this get notes stream. And we want to get the notes, and we can now order them by the timestamp. So descending, let's say true, meaning the newest one is going to be at the top. Cool. So if I come back to my UI in the home page, in the body of the scaffold, we want to use the stream builder. And you can see inside here, we have to give it a stream. And so we can give it our get notes stream. And so that's what it's going to be listening to. And then we can build the UI. So firstly, let's just check if the snapshot has data. Then we can get the docs. So let's create a list here called notes list. And we want to display it as a list view. Cool. So just to have a bit of plan about what we're doing. So the first thing is let's get the individual document. And then we want to get the string of notes from the document. And then let's give that to a list tile to display nicely in the UI. So the first thing is let's just get the individual document. So we're going through the index of the notes list. And one bit of useful information for our other couple methods coming up is going to be this document ID, just to keep track of the notes. So I'm just going to use this a bit later on. Now let's get the note from each document and store it in this data variable. So what we really want is just a string for the note text. And in the data, we can get this particular field called note. Sweet, so now let's display it as a list tile for the UI. And everything's all good, except we can finish off this if else. And so if there's no data, then let's just return no notes. Cool, and looks like we have some range error. Oh, that's because we didn't specify the item count. So that's just going to be however long the notes list is. Sweet, so let's just save this and rerun it. And you can see now we can read our database and we've got the first note, which means we should be able to create a second note. And there it is. Cool, so we can create and we can read now. The last couple is the update. So this one we need to know the doc ID. So we need to know which note we're updating. And we also need to know what the new note is going to be. So for this one, if you go to the notes, let's go to the particular doc ID and then let's just update. And you can just update the fields. So if I come back to my UI, let's just go to the trailing and let's have a gear button. So I'm just going to have an icon button here. And let's have a settings icon. Yeah, it's probably good. Cool, there's a gear. And so if I click on this, currently it's executing nothing. So what I want to do is I want to open up another box so that the user can type something in. Now let's see if we can recycle what we already used just to be efficient with our code. So we already have a open node box method here for when we add a new note. Now let's just add a parameter here for the document ID. And I'm going to put a question mark here. And what that means is this can potentially be null. I made a whole video about null safety, so check that out if you need. So when we call this method and we're giving the parameter document ID, we want a string, but it could also be a null value. So the reason why I'm doing this is because when we hit the button to save, let's put a little if statement here. So if the document ID is null, then we're going to add a new note. And then otherwise, we want to update an existing note. Okay, so if I come down to my button here, then we can just open the note box and just give it the doc ID. Let's hit the gear. We can now put in a new text. And you can see it got updated. Sweet. Which brings us to the last one, which is the deleting. Same thing, we need to know which note we're deleting. So let's accept the document ID as a parameter. And once we know that, let's just go to that document in the notes and just delete. And then in our UI, we need to have another delete button. So in the trailing, let's just put in a quick row here and have the button. So one's for the update, and let's just copy it to create another one for the delete. And for the onPressed, we just want to call the delete node and switch up the icon. Cool. And by the way, if you save this, you're going to get an error. So you need to specify the main access size to be minimum. Cool. So if I try this, then if I delete it, and then it will get deleted. And that's it. That's how you use the CRUD operations. Now we can use this to make some other cool apps using Flutter and Firebase. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. In this one, I'm going to teach you how to create a minimal social media app. We're going to start completely from scratch and start with authentication. And then once you're logged in, you can post a message to the wall. We'll have some additional pages like the profile page, and I'll also show you how we can make it using light mode as well as dark mode. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project, and I'm just going to delete everything below the main function just to start this from scratch. Now the very first thing we need to make is a login page, so I'm just going to create that in a separate folder called pages, just to keep our code nice and clean. And the login page for now will just start off with a blank scaffold. And let's just come back to our main function just to import it. And sweet, if you save everything, we should just have this nice white blank app. So this is where we'll begin. Now for this app, I want to take consideration for light mode, but also dark mode. So I'm going to create a new folder here called theme. And let's create a light mode file. And let's fill out the different colors for light mode. So the brightness, I'm going to make light. And the main thing here is the color scheme. So I'm going to fill out the background, primary, secondary, and also inverse primary is pretty helpful. So these are just different shades of gray that we're going to use. Cool. And maybe let's have another one for the text. We can have a body color and a display color. Cool. And then let's just do another quick one for dark mode. And so for dark mode, I'm just going to copy and paste this in, switch some of these values, make the grays a bit darker, and some of the text we can make lighter. Cool, so you can obviously choose whichever colors you want, but I'm going to go with this. Now in our main.dart file, in our material app, you can specify the theme to be light mode, and then we can also specify the dark theme, so we'll give dark mode. Cool, so if I just show you right at the beginning, if you go to the scaffold, we can say theme.ofContext, and we can go to the color scheme. If I just set the background color, this will just change depending on if it's light mode or dark mode. So currently it's in light mode, and let's start filling out the body. So in the middle, I'm just going to have a big column, and let's have a bit of a plan here. So I'm going to need a logo, and then maybe an app name, and then we need two text fields. So one for the email and one for the password. Let's have a forgot password as well. And the main thing here is the sign in button. And at the very bottom, we also want this little text saying, if you don't have an account, then register here, so that we can go to the register page. Cool, so let's start filling this out. Starting with the logo, you can place whatever image you want. I'm just going to start with a very simple person icon. And for the color, I'm going to give it the inverse primary. So it'll be a very dark color that we specified in the theme. Cool, and you can see there it is at the top. Now for the column, I'm just going to center this main axis alignment. And if I just toggle the appearance and I change it to dark mode, you can see that the colors change nicely. So let's just continue on. Now after the logo, I want to have a little gap. So let's use the size box. And then this is usually where you would put your app name. So I'm just going to say minimal. And when it comes to the text fields, I want to create this in a new folder called components, just so that we can reuse this later on. So I'm going to create a stateless widget here called my text field. And here are the different properties that I want to change between text field to text field. So the variables are going to be the hint text. Are we going to obscure the text, like for the password? And also, what is the controller? And the controller is used to access whatever's typed into the text field. So let's just require these when we create this text field. And just to show you real quick what's going on, if I just return a blank text field and come back to the login page, you can start typing my text field and you can hit enter to auto import. And now we can just start filling these out. So controller, we need to give it a controller. So let's just create that at the very top. We have to create a text editing controller. So the first one's going to be for email. And then we want another one for a password controller. So if you just save this, you can see there's a little line there. There's our text field, and we can just start typing stuff in. And we can access what the user typed in using this email controller. Cool, so let's just come back to our component text field just to decorate this up. So we can give it the controller that we passed through. And I just want to decorate it a little bit here. So I'm going to use an outline input border, which is what I like. And it looks like we probably need some space between the app name and the text field. And this column, let's give it a padding all the way around of 25. Nice. Sweet. Now I want to create another text field for the password. And again, we're going to need some space between, but a very small space. So let's make the height just 10. And for the obscure text, I want to say true for this one. So what this one is saying is we want to make sure that when the user types a password in, that you can't see it. So I'll show you what I mean. And one thing I always like to do is to make sure the border corners aren't so sharp. Like I like to specify the border radius and curve them a bit. You can obviously go for a much more curved look, but I'm going to go for 12. Cool. And we've got the hint text there. So what the hint text one is doing is if I just say email for the first one and then password for the second, you can see it kind of tells the user what should be typed in this text field. So it'll disappear when you start typing. Cool. And these little dots is what I mean by the obscure text, like for passwords. And it looks like it's currently set to true as default. So let's just pass through the obscure text variable. So the top one's false, the bottom one's true. So you can see in the email text field, we want to show the letters, but for the password, we want to hide them. So that's what that's doing. Cool, and then let's move on, have another little sized box of 10, and let's have a text widget saying forgot password. Now, I actually want to position this. It's in the middle right now, but I want to have it on the right-hand side. So a little trick is if you just put this in a row, you can see it's just gonna go straight to the left-hand side, and then I'm gonna specify the axis alignment to the end. There we go. Cool, and then let's just style this up a little bit. And dark mode and light mode looking pretty good so far. Now it's time for our sign-in button. So we might have to use some buttons later on again. So I'm gonna create this as a separate file in our components. Let's call this my button. And again, if we think about what's gonna be different from button to button, the first thing is the text that's written on this button. And also if I just use a gesture detector here for the on tab, the function of the button is going to be different, right? So let's just require those two parameters. And let's start decorating this up. So I'm just going to use a container here and just curve the corners a bit, add some padding. And then in the middle, we just want to display a text. So just to visually see what we just created, let's come back to our login page and import my button. Cool. So for the first one, I'm just going to say login, and then on tap, let's just execute nothing for now. Let's just see what this looks like. Cool. And there it is for light mode. Let's just see what dark mode. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. Sweet. So if I click on this button, right, we want to log in, which is a method we haven't created yet. So let's just create that on the top. And we can fill this out later on when we connect it to Firebase. Sweet, so that's our login page, but at the very bottom, we want to have a little message here saying, don't have an account, then register here. And the register button, we want to make it a bit bold because we want to show the user we can tap on this. By the way, if you ever don't like any of these colors, you can come back to your theme and adjust it to the way you want. Like for example, this inverse primary is looking a little bit too dark for my liking. So I'm just gonna soften that up a bit. And just check on dark mode as well. Everything's looking good to your preference. But yeah, like I said, in our login page at the very bottom, we want to make sure that the register here text widget is tappable. Like we want to click on this to go to the register page. So that's why we have it more bold. And let's wrap this in a gesture detector so that we can tap on this widget. Sweet, now let's create a new page for register and let's do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy everything from the login page and just change it to register page. And the main difference we need for this one is I'm going to create another text editing controller for confirming the password. And also let's have another one to accept the username as well. So we're going to use 4 text fields in total. And the button should say register instead of login. And at the very bottom, let's say already have an account, then log in here. So we can switch between the 2 pages. Cool, and just to show you the visual differences, if I go to the main.dart file, in the home, let's return the register page. Cool, and it looks like that's what it looks like, and it's working pretty good. So what we want to do is we want to be able to show the login page first, but if the user hasn't registered before, then we want them to be able to go to the register page and back and forth. So that's why we have these on tap methods that we created from before. So I'm going to create this at the top and require it when we create this login page as well as the register page. Just to organize what we're about to do, I'm going to create another folder called Auth, and I'm going to create a file here called login or register. So what this one's going to do is it's going to be a stateful widget. And initially, we're just going to show a login page, and then we're going to create a toggle so that we can go between the 2 pages. Cool, so when we build this widget, just depending on if we are showing the login page, then return login page. And you can see there's that on tap that we specified from before. Just give it the toggle pages method, and same thing for the register page. Sweet, so if I come back to my main.dart file, instead of returning one page or the other, let's just return this new login or register page, okay? And just again, to be clear, it's gonna fire up this login or register page. And at the beginning, we're going to show login page, and we can see these toggles. If we tap on these text widgets here, we can go between the 2 pages. Awesome. Now let's go to your Firebase console and let's create a new project. I'm going to call it Minimal Social App. Sweet. Now what we need to do is let's go to our authentication and let's click Get Started. And if you go to the sign-in providers, let's add a new provider and click the email and password. Sweet. Then let's come back to our Flutter project and let's hook it up to Firebase. So in your terminal, just make sure first of all, if you hit Firebase login, that is logged into the same email as your Firebase console. Then we want to say .pub global activate Flutter Fire CLI. Looks like I got this little error, so I'm just going to copy that in. And this is the main thing, Flutter Fire configure. And then look for the project that you just created. There's my one, minimal social app. And I'm going to create this for iOS and Android. The last thing we need to do is to add the Firebase core package. And we want to add in the Firebase Auth package as well. Sweet, and then just a little bit of code in the main function. Just to finish the setting up, we want to say widgets flutter binding ensure initialized. And let's make this an asynchronous function. And let's await the Firebase to initialize the app. Cool, and just save it and run your app again just to make sure there's no more errors. And if you come back to your Firebase console, if you refresh the page, you should be able to see that we have these two apps connected now. Awesome, so now what we're going to do is let's try to create a new user. So we have this nice register page and we have this register method for us to fill out. In here, let's just have a little plan. So firstly, we want to show a loading circle and we want to check to make sure that the passwords and the confirmed passwords match. And once that's all done, then let's try creating the user. So just starting with showing the loading circle, I'm just going to show a dialog here and I need the context. So I'm actually just going to switch this state list widget to a stateful widget. And you can do that by hovering your mouse over the state list widget word and hit command dot. I think on Windows it's control dot and you'll have this option to switch to a stateful widget. So in this little dialog box, let's show in the middle a circular progress indicator. So that's just our loading circle. And let's make sure that we are going to create the user only if the passwords match. So if the password controller and the confirm password controller isn't the same, then we're going to pop the loading circle and let's just show a little error to the user telling them, to fix the password. So displaying this kind of message is going to be pretty common use case for us. So let's just create another method here. And this one, I'm actually going to create it in a new folder, in a new file here, just called helper functions, because we might need to use it across the app. This one is just for displaying an error to the user, or just displaying a message to the user. So for the parameters, just given a string that's a message, let's show a dialog displaying this message. So just to see what we just did, we can now import this little help function and we can give it a message like passwords don't match. And we'll see later on what this looks like. But let's just finish off this code real quick. So let's try to create the user now. Now in Firebase, we are going to say Firebase auth.instance, and you can see here the create user with email and password. That's what we want, and we can just give it the email and password. And looks like we should change this to an asynchronous function. And then finally, if that's all done, then pop the circle. Now we might get some errors. So if we have a Firebase auth exception, let's catch this error. And again, pop the circle, but display the message to the user. And again, that's why that helper function is very helpful. So I'm just going to kill this app and let's just run it again. Sweet, now let's go to our register page. I'm going to say Mitch for the username. mitchcoco@gmail.com. And the first thing I just want to check is, let's try to say our password and the confirm password is different. Let's just see the error message. Sweet, passwords don't match. Fill out the username, fill out the email, and let's create a user. Sweet. Now if I come back to my Firebase console and you go to the authentication, you can see there's our new user that we just created. Sweet. And by the way, just to optimize this code a little bit, we should say if the passwords don't match, and put this in an if else statement. So we only want to try to create the account as long as the passwords match. So we can help the code out a little bit. And now let's try to log in. So we created a user. So let's try to fill out this login method. So it's kind of similar. We're going to show a loading circle first. And then we're going to try the sign in. So if you go to your Firebase auth.instance, you can see this option, sign in with email and password. And then we can pop the loading circle. And if we have any errors, just display the error. Awesome. Now, what this means is if we have users that can sign in and sign out, we want to have a way to make sure that the app can automatically know what pages to display. Like if the user signed in, then we want to display the home page. If the user isn't signed in, then we want to display the login register page. So we're going to go to our auth folder and create another file called auth.dart. And this one, I'm just going to call it auth page. And what it's going to do is it's going to use a stream to just listen to the authentication. So if the user is signed in or not. So the stream that we're going to listen to is Firebase auth.instance. And you can see here it's called auth state changes. So this will just let us know about if the user is signed in or not. So if the user is logged in, then we're going to return the home page, which we haven't created yet. If the user is not logged in, then that's when we want to display the login or register page. Right, so just to demonstrate what we are doing, I'm just going to create a home page real quick. Let's just show a blank scaffold. Let's just have an app bar saying home page. Awesome. So just starting from the main function, just to keep everyone on the same page, it's going to fire up my app. And then we're going to go to the login or register page currently. So I'm going to change this to auth page, which is what we just created. And this is going to firstly listen for if we are already signed in or not. Okay, it looks like we are in the home page, but our app bar is kind of funny. Let's just give it a color. And we can naturally have an action for a logout button. Right, so logging out is also very easy. It's just Firebase auth instance .sign out. So we can now log in, we can now log out. Sweet, now let's keep moving on. Now we are able to do the authentication. We can sign users in. And so we're at this home page. Now we're going to create a few more pages for this app. So we've got the home page. We want a profile page. And then let's also have a users page to display all of the users inside the app. So for this app bar color, let's give it sort of our theme. Now the first thing I want to have is the drawer. to kind of organize these pages. So without even filling out anything, if you just save this, you can see there's that little menu button on the top left, and I can open up a blank drawer. So what I'm going to do is, just to keep our code nice and organized, I'm going to create my drawer in my components folder, just to separate out the code. Cool, so let's give it our background color. And then we're going to have a column. So just have a bit of a plan. We have a drawer header at the top. And then we're going to have 3 tiles. So the home, profile, and the user tile. So let's just start with the drawer header. This one, I'm just going to give it an icon. And this is just a convenient widget to have on the top of a drawer. Just occupies a good amount of space. And then for the list tiles, so I'm just going to have the home one first. Now when I tap on this, the home, we are already home, so we just want to pop this dialog. And maybe we could give some padding just to the left of this. Sweet. Now let's copy this list tile, and I'm gonna do the same thing for profile. And users, and also logout. Now when it comes to the logout button, I want to have that on the very bottom, while the rest 3 are at the top. So what I'm going to do is, everything except for the logout list tile, I'm going to group them in its own column. And then this overall column, I'm going to make the main access alignment space between. So this will just push the logout to the bottom. And just for the logout tile, I'm just going to add some extra padding for the bottom side. Okay, this is looking visually good. So we're going to use this drawer to deal with the navigation to go to different pages. So let's just create some quick scaffolds here for the profile page and the users page. Now, if you come to the main.dart file, we can go to the routes, and this will help us to organize our pages to navigate to. So I'm just going to list out all of the pages that we have. So we've got the login, register page, home page, profile page, and users page. So the reason why these routes are useful is, if we click on this profile tile, we want to pop the drawer up, but we also want to navigate to this profile page. So we can give it that route name. And similar to the users tile. Awesome, and then the last one was the logout. Now we actually had the logout button in our app bar, right? So let's actually get rid of that and put it inside of our drawer. Okay, much better. And we can navigate to the different pages. Sweet. Looks like we can't really see the app bar, but we can focus on decorating it now. Great. Now the last Firebase service we want to use is the Cloud Firestore. So this is just to store the data for the users' posts, and also some information about all of the users that we have. So in your Firebase console, let's go to your Firestore database and create a database. Just hit next, and you can select your location. I'm just going to leave mine at the US. And one thing you want to do here real quick is in the rules, we can allow the read and write if true. I'm just going to change that so that we can update some of the data. Awesome. Now we come back to our Flutter project, and we should open up our terminal and add the package for the Firestore. Cool. So now we can store some information about any of the data in our app. So the first thing I want to store is when we create a new user, I want to store this user credential in my database so that I can have a page in the users page where I just sort of list out all of the users that we have in that app. So when we create the new user, we have this user credential. So I'm going to create a user document and add it to the Firestore. So let's create that method real quick. So this will be a future create user document with the given user credential. So first of all, let's just check real quick. Just make sure it's not null. And this is how we add a new document to our database. So we're going to go to our collection called users. That's the group it's going to be under. And we can create a new document here with the user's email. And then we can set some information here. So I want to store the email and the username. Okay, so I restarted my app just to make sure all the changes were done well, especially when you add a new package. Just restart your app and let's create a new user. Let's create one for Ronaldo. So I register it. Let's see in our Cloud Firestore, if I refresh the page, you can see there's our new collection that we just added, and you can see it's the Ronaldo. So this is how we store some data in our app using Firestore. Cool, which means we can now have a profile page sort of displaying the current logged in user, and we can get the user's details to display on this profile page. So let's grab the current user. You can say Firebase auth.instance.current user, and then let's use a future to get the user's details that we just added. So remember, we had that in our collection called users. And let's get those documents. So in our profile page, let's sort of decorate this up as we go along with the background color. But the main thing here is the body. We're going to use a future builder. And what we're going to build is very similar to what we had in the other pages. We're just going to firstly show a loading circle and then any error that we need to display. And then let's get the data. So firstly, let's show a loading circle if we need. And then if we have an error, let's display the error. And then finally, if we have the data, then let's grab the data from this user. Okay, so once we have the user, let's grab the email field and the username field. Okay, and at the very end, else, if we have nothing, just display no data. Okay, now let's see if this works. If I save this and I go to my profile, yeah, you can see the Ronaldo information, which is the current logged in user. Sweet. So now we can display the current user. Let's go to our users page and try to display all the users. So let's just start off by giving it a background color. And then the stream builder, we're going to listen for the collection of users. So again, just display any errors if we need. And show a loading circle. And then let's get all the users. And we're going to display it using a list view builder. So the item count is just going to be however many users we have. And finally, in the item builder, let's get the individual user. So we're going through the index of users. And let's just return it using a basic list tile. And whoops, this should be inside of a text widget. Okay, so let's save that and let's create a new user here. So let's create like Bill Gates or something. You can see if you go to the profile, then yep, we can see our information, Bill Gates. And then if you go to the users page, we can see all of the users that are signed in. So we've got Ronaldo and Bill Gates. Awesome. Now let's spend the next few moments to just decorate this up. So the profile page, I actually don't want an app bar. So if I come down to my column, you got the username, you got the email, and at the top, let's have a kind of profile picture section. So I'm going to use a person icon and just use some decoration with a curved border. Yeah, something like this. And let's also style up the username, make it much bigger and much bolder. And space this out a little bit. And decorate up the email as well. Cool, that's looking pretty good. Now I want to have a kind of custom back button. So I'm going to create my own one in the components. Now I'm going to create my own back button here. So I'm going to have a gesture detector. And when you tap on this back button, we're just going to pop the current page. And for the container, I'm going to have a back arrow. And let's give it some padding. And decoration. I want this to be a circle. Sweet, something like that. Cool, now I actually want it on the left hand side. So a little trick here is you can put this inside of a row and that'll push it to the left. And let's just use some padding just to position it where we want. Cool. And let's just make sure dark mode. Yep, dark mode is looking good as well. Sweet. Now let's go to our users page and decorate this up. So again, copy in that back button. Okay, let's delete the app bar. So now let's come back to our home page, and for this app bar title, I'm just going to call it the wall. And we can make the background color transparent, make the foreground color the inverse primary. And let's start filling out the body of this column. So now we want to try to post a message. So the very top thing at the column, I'm going to have a text field to have a box for the user to type. Good thing we created our own text field in our components from before, because we can now use it again, right? So we can say like say something, and we need a controller. So let's come to the top and create a controller. Cool, now if I save it, there it is. Now I'm going to need some padding on either side. Or maybe just all the way around. I want 25. Okay, so now when it comes to posting messages and retrieving those messages from Firebase, I'm going to create a new folder called database. And let's create a new file called firestore.dart. So I'm just going to separate out the logic from the UI as much as I can. So I'm going to create a class here called Firestore database. And just to have a bit of explanation at the top, this database stores posts that users have published in the app. It is stored in a collection called posts in Firebase. And each post is going to contain a message, the email of the user, and also the timestamp. So let's have a bit of a plan here. We firstly need to know the current logged in user, and we want to be able to get the collection of posts from Firebase. And a few methods here, we want to be able to post a message and also read posts from Firebase. So let's just start off with getting the current logged in user. And then for the collection of posts, we can go to the Firebase Firestore instance, collection posts. Now, this is the main important methods here. So for posting a message, it's going to be a feature. Let's call it add post. And all I need to know is what's the message that I'm going to post. So we have that collection of posts, and let's just add in another post. And remember, each post is going to have 3 bits of information, just the user that posted it, the message, and also the timestamp. Sweet, so now let's imagine that we have a bunch of posts in our database. Now we want to be able to read that information and display it back into our app. So for this one, it's going to be a stream to continuously listen for any changes. So we want to get the posts, and let's just order them by timestamp. Descending is true, so in other words, the latest post will be at the top. And then we can just return this stream. Awesome. Now I'm just going to quickly create a custom button to post when the user types a message in. So just starting off with a gesture detector, we need the on tap, and I'm just going to create a very simple, minimal button. So if I come back to my home page, next to my text field, I need to put this in a row. And by the way, when you do this, you have to expand the text field because we have to fill the remaining space. And then next to it, we want to put a post button that we just created. Sweet, and there it is. Now it looks like I'm going to need to add some padding to this and just some margin on the left hand side. And let's just refine the colors here. Cool, looking good. Sweet, so if I hit this button on the on tap, we want to have a method to post a message, right? Now, one little useful check here is to only post a message if there is something in the text field, right? We don't want to be sending blank posts. So if the controller is not empty, then let's try to add it to the Firestore. So we want to access those Firestore methods that we created in this class. So in our home page at the top, let's get access to that Firestore. I'm actually going to call it database instead of Firestore. And now we can just say database.addPost, and we can give it the message, which is going to be whatever is in the controller. Sweet. And then a very good idea is to clear the controller. So after the user posts a message, we want to have nothing in the controller anymore. Now, looks like I forgot to actually give the method to my button. So if I say first post and then I click post, and if I come back to my console and I refresh it, you can see there's our collection of posts and there's our first one there. Looks good. So now that we can post a message and it's in Firebase, let's try to read it back into our app. So again, that's going to be using a stream builder. And we are going to listen for the stream that we created for the get post stream. And this is going to be the last time that we need to do this. So let's show a loading circle first. Let's get all posts. And if there's no data, and then finally we can return the list. Right, so we're going to go through however many posts we have. We're going to get the individual post. And then get the data from each of those posts, which is the message, the user email, and the timestamp. And then in terms of the UI, we can return it using a very simple list tile. Cool, so that's the functionality is all done. Then everything else is just decorating, right? Like the styling of these texts and the different UI elements for us to make it look aesthetic. Right, so you can add some padding. And so even this list tile, because as we decorate it, it's getting bigger and bigger. I probably want to reuse this list tile. So I'm going to create a new component called my list tile and just start decorating it inside here. So for this list tile, it's going to be, we have to give it a title and a subtitle. And yep, that's making our code look much cleaner. And even in our users, right, we have these list tiles. So we can come back to that users page. And instead of just displaying a basic list tile, let's give it the one we just created. And then if you want to further customize this, then you can just do that in the list tile component, right? Like maybe giving it some color and some border radius. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. But we have just created the minimal social app, right? And again, let's just check the dark mode just to make sure it's looking pretty good. And yep, looking sleek. And that's it. That's how you create a very minimal social app using Firebase and Flutter.